My name is Treg Burnt, Senator, District 21, Ada County, good state of Idaho. So before us, I'm here to present House Bill 599 regarding ballot harvesting. And we do have the Secretary of State here. I'm going to allow him to explain this bill. I promise you he's going to do a much better job with it than I ever could. So I'm going to pass the torch on to him if you don't mind.
Secretary McGrain, will you yield? Please introduce yourself for the record, and we do have to try to be out of here by 10, so.
Are you telling me I can be long-winded, Mr. Chairman? For the record, Mr. Chairman, I'm Phil McGrain. I'm both long-winded and your Secretary of State. I will try to be brief. Thank you, committee members, for hearing this. This should be familiar to many of you. I think this is the third rendition in terms of ballot harvesting. The Speaker and I have worked closely on this legislation for quite some time now, trying to refine it. And I honestly think this committee is where a lot of that refinement has occurred. I do encourage your support to just quickly and briefly, first of all, the act of ballot harvesting, it's not an official term, but it's just gathering lots of absentee ballots, collecting them and depositing them. We don't see that practice here in the state of Idaho, at least not on any scale. In other states, it is widely practiced. So, for example, in the state of California, this is just common practice among political committees. There are some very notorious incidents. Specifically in 2018, there was a congressional race in North Carolina that was actually overturned and felony charges were applied, multiple misdemeanors for people collecting ballots. What they were doing is they were going around and picking up absentee ballots where the voters anticipated they would be returning them. In that specific case, rather than returning them, they were sorting through them and returning some of them and discarding others. Needless to say, we can all see that that's wrong. This is us. We don't have any guidance right now statutorily on the collection of absentee ballots. That's what this legislation does, is specifically, and I think this is the refinement piece, it's specifically, if you're looking on page 2, subsection 3, really it's targeting is anybody involved. So candidates, you as candidates, anybody working on your campaigns cannot collect absentee ballots, the physical ballots. This doesn't apply to registration cards or absentee requests. It only applies to the ballots. And it's really to prevent any, incentives can be bad in that case because you're trying to win your race. And so this is saying only official election workers should handle ballots, only postal workers or UPS. So when you look at above that, the exceptions, it allows for family members to carry ballots all the way to first cousins, first removed. So we've done a broad reach in terms of family members, allows caregivers to return ballots. It allows household members, so your roommate, say your roommate's not a family member, but you live together, can carry your ballot. So we've worked through all those things we've discussed in the past. Really, the emphasis here is on the people who are politically motivated in the process. And just to note, too, also, because it doesn't stand out in this, at the line 27, 28 on page 2, it is a misdemeanor unless someone does 10 or more ballots. And so, I think we've tailored this well so that we can have something on the books to prevent this from occurring. And so for that, I ask for your support.
See, you do have the ability to be succinct. Is there questions for Secretary McGrain? Don't see any. Oh,
I'm sorry.
Senator Winthrop.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Secretary. It's so good to see you. So I think I understand, but here's the question I have is so I don't get in trouble. How do we know when somebody's not volunteering for the campaign anymore? And then as far as the caregiver goes, is that how do we, tell me how we're defining that?
Secretary McGrain.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Winthrop, I think in both of these, just like anything else we have to work on, it's a collection of the facts, the information at the time. I mean, this would be just like any other criminal provision in terms of enforcement, looking at the circumstances. Say someone volunteered on your campaign last cycle, but isn't this cycle. I think that prosecutors are very capable in law enforcement to make those distinctions. I think the same thing in terms of being an active caregiver versus not at the time. I think these type of investigations happen all the time in various forms of our criminal code, and I think it would be applied the same here.
Don't see any other questions. Let's go to some testimony. Olivia Luna. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name's Olivia Luna, and I'm speaking on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Idaho and its members statewide. The League is opposed to the House bill for the same reasons we opposed the previous iterations. The fixes to this bill have not allayed our concerns. In the proposed new section of code, someone who is paid by the voter is okay, but a trusted friend, neighbor, or non-cohabiting partner are not. What right is it of the state to determine who voters can trust with their ballots? Criminalizing friendship and neighborliness is just wrong. Of course, the provisions in H599 are completely unenforceable, so perhaps just the threat of endangering friends and neighbors keeps voters from asking for assistance. The League has received queries from individuals with disabilities anxious that these measures would limit their right to vote. That could affect many of the 10% of Idahoans under 65 who are disabled. Others at risk of being disenfranchised include the homebound who live alone, senior citizens no longer able to drive, members of rural communities, individuals in working class jobs without the privilege of taking time off, and those who may lack reliable transportation. These are our neighbors, our friends, hardworking Idahoans seeking a voice in their state's government. There is zero evidence that those who help these individuals submit their ballots are intent on changing them for some criminal purpose. Idahoans help one another is the Idaho way. Send H599 back to the sponsor again. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
I don't see any. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Bonnie Schuster. Welcome to committee.
Thank you.
You might have to pull that mic down.
Definitely. My name is Bonnie Schuster. I live in Boise. I'm representing myself today, and I'm not a fan of ballot harvesting, which doesn't happen here. And I'm a big fan of election integrity. But when I read this bill, I thought about my mom, and Olivia did a great job of explaining why this would hurt someone like her. She passed away last fall at the age of 104. She was born the year that women got the right to vote, and until she was 102, she went by herself, either walking or driving to her polling place to vote in person. But at 102, when she reluctantly stopped driving, somewhat at our behest, then she had to start voting by absentee ballot for the next 2 years of her life. My mom was fiercely independent. She lived alone. She did not have a caretaker, and her nearest relative was 2.5 hours away. She was very concerned about putting her ballot in the mail because the Postal Service was having so many problems, especially over the last several years where they were, well, for various reasons. And I happened to be there when she needed to put her ballot in a drop box. So I was able to take her and do that. And I fit one of the exceptions as a relative. But if I hadn't been there, she would have wanted to rely on a friend who drove or a neighbor who would have been glad to do that. But the only exception here for that situation is if they are a compensated person. And I don't know what that means. Could my mom have offered her friend who was still driving a nickel, some cookies, in order for that person to be able to put her ballot in a drop box and give my mom some confidence and not risk a misdemeanor? So that's my problem with this legislation, and I would appreciate it if you would not advance it or ask that it be amended to allow a friend or neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Russ Hendricks. Welcome to committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Russ Hendricks, and I'm here representing the members of the Idaho Farm Bureau, and we do support House Bill 599. Actually, Farm Bureau does have policy on this. Our policy says we oppose vote harvesting practices. Now, I want to make it clear that we're not asserting that there's widespread fraudulent vote harvesting going on here in Idaho. However, it is well known that mail-in balloting is the election form that is most susceptible to fraud. House Bill 599 provides some common sense sideboards to ensure that we have the minimum amount of fraud into the future. Now, there have been opponents that have asserted that House Bill 599 would make it too difficult to vote, and I'd like to take just a moment to provide a little perspective on that. If we think back 100 years ago, Most residents did not live in a city. Cars were not very common. If you wanted to get to a polling place on election day, which was your only option to vote, you had to either hitch up the team or saddle a horse or walk several miles to get to the polling place and back. And it took a lot of thought, a lot of effort, a lot of planning to be able to exercise your right to vote. It was a sacrifice, but people were willing to do that. Now, today, voting is so much easier than it has ever been.
No, it isn't.
And it does take a little planning still. You have to hopefully plan ahead to think about who you're going to vote for, think about how you're going to get your ballot to the box. So this would just take a tiny bit more planning to figure out who you're going to have take your ballot if that's necessary. We believe that sacrificing, allowing anybody under the sun to take your ballot in return for enhancing election integrity is a wise and prudent trade-off. So thank you very much and hope you can support the bill.
Senator Winthrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Hendricks. I was so struck by Bonnie Schuster's testimony about her mom, and it made me think about my dad, who lived alone and was older. And even though he was a letter carrier, he would never have put it in the mail. But would you be agreeable with that little friendly amendment potentially? Would that still gain your support if you added neighbor or friend or something like that? So I was just so struck by her story.
Mr. Hendricks.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Winthrop, I think the bill is great, the way it's put together.
You would.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got to everybody that's here in person. We're going to miss a couple of people online, and I do apologize sincerely for that. But with that, I'd ask Secretary McGrain to wrap us up quickly.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything to add unless there are any additional questions.
Senator Harris.
I don't have any questions, Mr. Chairman. I have a motion ready if you're ready.
Motion's in order.
I would move to send House Bill 599 to the Senate floor with a due pass recommendation.
Motion by Senator Harris, second by Senator Taves, that House Bill 599 be sent to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Discussion on the motion. Senator Winthrop.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't get to ask the secretary if he'd be friendly to that amendment from Bonnie Schuster, but I'm guessing I know the answer.
I'm guessing I know it too. I'll allow you to respond. It's
Mr. Chairman, Senator Winthrop, just briefly, I want to note a couple things because I do definitely recognize Mrs. Schuster's story. I think we've really tried hard to work through this specifically in these type of situations. Overwhelmingly, absentee ballots travel through the mail. That's what they're designed to be, how they're designed to be delivered. But even in these situations, I think specifically the caregiver provision, whether it's somebody assisting, say, buying someone's groceries, and bringing them to home, giving that type of situation, that person would be authorized to transport the ballot. So I think we've addressed that. And the ambiguity of how do you define caregiver is just as much something that has to be worked through as defining friend and neighbor. And I think there's broader concerns about the definition of friend and neighbor, hence why I think we have worked through to address that type of situation. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. I don't see any other discussion. Those in favor of sending House Bill 599 to the floor with a due pass indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Senators Winthrop and Shea, would you like to be recorded as voting no? With that, motion carries.